Hi everyone, I thought I'd do a quick video on multi-throttle body drive-by-wire setups. Most of these end up being custom. There's not too many off-the-shelf ones. So I see quite a few of them coming across my desk for me to calibrate. So I thought I'd do a video and just give you a little bit of advice on what some things that you really need to do and be aware of when you're designing your system. What I have here is a Gen V setup, probably not a real great example of custom, quote unquote, because Gen V is starting to put these motors on their normal multi-throttle body setups, but this is probably a pretty good one to use as an example because it's got a lot of nice features. Okay, this has a Gen V motor on it, and they've done a really good job of mounting the motor to the throttle body assembly. They've got a couple of nice, really good brackets here, so the motor is nice and stiff on the actual throttle body assembly. Contrary to popular belief, the one most important sensor is actually the one on the motor and not the one on the throttle butterflies themselves. The ECU is actually controlling the position of this motor, and by virtue of you actually having a nice solid mount, the position of the motor should be the position of the throttle bodies realistically. So the sensor on the actual motor is more important from a control point of view than any other sensor on the system. This set of throttle bodies actually has a second sensor on the opposite end from the motor. Most drive-by-wire systems will end up having a total of 4 sensors. That's 2 in the pedal and 2 on the throttle bodies. That's to give some redundancy for the system so it keeps good track of where everything is. The Motec M1 system doesn't actually need the second throttle position sensor on the other end, but if you've got it, you might as well wire it up and make sure it's there, because it's there for redundancy and the system just works better and it's a bit more accurate and a bit safer having 2 of them on there. Another word on these sensors, especially the one on the motor, this is actually the feedback for a control system, so it's extremely important to the control of the position of that motor. So I've had over the years some cheaper brand sensors that just give you just enough noise that it'll upset the system and the throttle control won't be smooth. You don't need to go out and spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars, but then also you don't need to spend $2 either. So buy something decent. One thing I like about this Gen V setup is being 4 throttle bodies, it's really hard to run one continuous shaft through all of them, because you might end up bolting it onto the engine and getting some slight unevenness. So it's actually quite hard to do it all as one. So what they have is individual shafts and a nice little joiner here which allows for some misalignment. That's quite important, so you don't get any binding or problem with the system moving smoothly. Back on the motor side, this one obviously using a motor supplied by Gen V. Now the current draw of this motor is actually quite important, because the more current you have, the more heat you have build up in your electronics. As a guide, that wide open throttle up against all the springs, that should draw 2 amps or less. It's a pretty good guide. That's what the factory systems all seem to do. They'll draw a bit more on snap, open and close, but as long as you stick to about 2 amps or less, it'll be fine. One of the biggest contributing factors to how much torque the motor needs or how much current is the return springs. The fly-by-wire system still does have return springs, although the motor does indeed drive the throttle bodies in both directions, open and closed. Now my 2 amps that I'm talking about is when the throttles are wide open, so the springs are wound up the most, so 2 amps is your limit there. For snap open and snap close, it will be slightly more. You'll get spikes up to 10 amps, but that's okay. So it's the continuous current that it draws at wide open, wound up on these springs. So if you're over 2 amps, you need to reduce your spring. Choice of motors, I like this Gen V one. It comes with the motor and the gearbox, so it's got a reduction drive in it to actually give you the torque and the speed on the motor. So I really like this one. If you can't use one of these, you can actually use a BMW one as well. The 6-cylinder and the V8 BMW M series engines had a multi-throttle body setup on it with a nice little motor that sat in the valley or against the side of the block with a linkage, so that worked as well. So you got 2 options there. Really don't like the idea of getting a single individual throttle body like off a Commodore or something and hacking it up. I really don't like that. Something that's monumentally important to any multi-throttle body drive-by-wire system is the linkage motion ratio. So I've just drawn a bit of a diagram here to show you that we've got like the angle the motor moves through and the angle the throttle butterfly linkage moves through. You really want them to match as perfectly as possible, so that as the motor moves a certain distance, the throttle butterflies move that certain distance as well. Just to draw it a slightly different way, I've got a diagram here with a few different, let's call them curves. So the best one would be the green one. So that simply means that the motor moves through 90 degrees and the throttle bodies move through 90 degrees. A little bit more or a little bit less, like the blue or the yellow, is perfectly fine. But if you start looking at the red one, where you've got a really sort of crazy non-linear ratio, you can think of the motion ratio as the amount of force the motor has to put into the system. The more linear that is, the much better it's going to work. The further to being a non-linear system, the worse the control is going to be. Most closed loop systems really like things being linear. Okay, I hope that was informative. If you've got any questions, like most people know how to contact me, you can find me on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. If you've got any questions, yeah, just give me a holler.